The word extraordinary was used so much in the last couple of days, but it really was an extraordinary scene. You were right in the thick of it there as he came down the steps and he was looking for the taxi on the way out. What goes through your mind when you're in the middle of that? Because that was frenetic level chaos. That was.
Yeah. It was. Listen, it was very chaotic. I think we didn't know for a start if he was going to come out the front door or the side doors. So you never know. In these cases, I mean, how often do we see people acquitted? All the time I've been in court, I've seen one acquittal, one murder acquittal in that time. It's not a common thing. So everyone, and of course, this is someone who's a very high profile individual. We heard that he was going to walk out the door of the court. Didn't know if that was going to be the side entrance. So you could see from the pictures, there was photographers and camera crews covering both. It was actually Ashley McNicushtal, our colleague, who was down there with me that day. And she called me. She's like, we heard he's coming out the front door. So myself and Alvaro, our cameraman, we legged it round the front, waiting a couple of minutes. And I mean, it was just it was a mob. I mean, at first, couldn't even get near Hutch. I could see our cameraman, Alan Fraser, was in the thick of it. And I'm not going to lie, I had a moment of going, I do not want to be sprinting and being in the background of all this footage.
Not a pretty place to be, like.
No. Yeah, you can see, I could see all the camera crews there, and it's never a good look if you're running around and you're caught off guard. But at the same time, I was like, I need to do my job, and I wanted to get a question in. And there was a point.
Get many questions in, but he said nothing, did he?
He said nothing. He politely declined to talk to anyone. But I mean, it was just the most maddest scenario because he came down the steps, he walked around the corner up towards Infirmary Road. He was trying to get a taxi. And then there was this individual who I'm sure you've seen him since, or you saw him in the footage that day. No one's actually quite clear who that man was, if he was a relative of Mr. Hutch's.
This is the man who kept telling the media, leave Gerry alone.
Exactly.
Leave him alone.
So no one knew if he was actually with him or did he just turn up at that point. You had people shouting out cars, congratulations, Gerry. Heard loads of people say that. But he was just almost walking up and then he'd walk back down the street. And this was going round in circles for a while. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that we got one question in because I didn't actually know at that point if he had said anything or if he was going to talk to anyone. But eventually he got in a taxi and near enough to the Phoenix Park. So I'd say that was a very interesting journey.
Do you think he is going to give an interview, Debs? I know he gave an interview back in 2008, I think. But do you think he'll give an interview now?
I think it's very hard to say. I mean, whether or not he will stay in the country. I will say one thing. During the trial, we did hear a lot from his counsel because if you have to remember what an extraordinary trial this was. But the drama had actually began before the trial even did because it was only 10 days before the Regency trial was meant to get underway that Johnathan Dowdall gave a statement to Gardaí and that the murder charge against him was dropped and he pleaded guilty to facilitating the Regency attack. And I remember that day because I think I was down at a Garda conference in Kildare or something, and then we got word that Johnathan Dowdall was pleading guilty. This was just an extraordinary development in this case. So within 1 week, we had his sentence hearing. We then heard that he had given a statement to incriminate Gerry Hutch. It wasn't clear then if the Regency trial was going to be delayed for months, that, what this development actually meant. But Brendan Grehan, who represented Mr. Hutch, said that, he wanted this trial to be done in public and that, he said his client was pleading not guilty, that, he was very keen that justice had to be seen to be done. He obviously is now an acquitted man. Whether or not he will want to talk to the media, whether or not he's going to remain in the country, I think, probably the $1 million question.
It is, and I think you alluded to it at the start, that there was a feeling that this was going to go in the direction that it ended up going. Some people I've spoken to are legal eagles really around this. They felt this for a long time, that this was all going in one direction because of the evidence that was provided by Johnathan Dowdall and whether or not that was credible or not. That is kind of one of the extraordinary outstanding sort of issues of this, is that how much the state came to rely on this one man who was effectively decimated in the judgment there by the Supreme Court, or the Special Criminal Court.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's fair to say the three judges of the Special Criminal Court were absolutely scathing in how they referred to Johnathan Dowdall. They said that his demeanour in the recordings, portrayed him as, I think, was a callous-based criminal. They effectively said that he was someone whose evidence couldn't be trusted. And of course, Johnathan Dowdall was a very problematic witness because if you go back to his history, go back to 2016 when the guards searched his house after the Regency attack. It was at that point they found a USB stick in his house. That led of him waterboarding a man. That led to him being convicted of false imprisonment, that charge. He spent 8 years in prison for that. But it was also in 2016, in May 2016, when he was first arrested in relation to the Regency, that he asked Gardaí, was there any way out? Would he be able to get onto the witness protection programme? It wasn't until 2021 that Johnathan Dowdall was actually charged with murder. And by that point, he was released on bail on the murder charge. And as I said, it wasn't 10 days before the actual trial began. But the judges referred to the fact that in 2016, that time of when his house was raided, he went on Joe Duffy giving out, basically saying that his life had been torn apart and that he was being someone who was being portrayed as a criminal, but said, he had never been involved in any kind of criminality. When he was on the stand, he tried to explain that away and kind of say, well, I was never involved in criminality in the sense of making ill-gotten gains. Yeah. But effectively what the judges came to the conclusion they came to was that he couldn't be relied on, his evidence. His character, I think it's fair to say they assassinated his character in the judgment. They annihilated his evidence in the witness box. They said that he had lied in court. That was in relation to one specific time when it was put to him that he had been a friend of Pierce McCauley, and he's a man who was convicted of murdering a Garda. Yeah. He is in prison, and it was put to him that Johnathan Dowdall had visited him, and Johnathan Dowdall, when he was in the stand, said, I went to see him 3 or 4 times. But Brendan Grehan, Defence Counsel, had the prison records there and said, you actually went to visit him 14 times. So the court found that he had lied to the court. He had previously lied to another special criminal court. So it had all these issues with him. And it also said that, given everything, so when you put everything together, they said he could not be trusted as a witness. And then you got to his specific testimony, and they said that they weren't prepared to accept that on its own because of the nature of the witness he was, and that needed corroborative evidence.
And there wasn't really, I know, much was made of the tape, the recording from the car. There really was no admission on that tape from Gerry the Monk Hutch at all.
Yeah, I mean, the prosecution argued there was. They said, that his failure to give any pushback, that Johnathan Dowdall had kind of put it to him in these tapes that he was involved in the Regency. But they had said, there was no pushback or denial from Mr. Hutch. And of course, there was the reference to the Three Yokes, which they said, showed that Mr. Hutch was in control of the weapons on March 7th, 2016, the day of this recording, which was only 2 days before these weapons were intercepted by Gardaí. So it said that he was in control of the weapons used in the Regency. Now, the judges ultimately found that, he was in control of the weapons at that time, but that was not the case against him. The case against him was that he was one of the gunmen and he was present at the Regency that day.